I watched my husband slice through my platinum card with kitchen shears, his face glowing with the kind of pride usually reserved for hunting trophies. He thought he was cutting off my oxygen, severing my lifeline to the world to teach me a lesson about respect. He didn't know that 3 hours ago, the useless separate account I had hidden for years had just received a wire transfer that was exactly 3 times the net worth of his entire company. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The sound of the shears grinding against the thick plastic was nauseatingly slow. It wasn't a snap, it was a crunch, like a bone breaking. I stood by the granite island, my hands gripping the cold stone edge so hard my knuckles turned the color of skim milk. I wanted to lung across the counter. I wanted to scream that he was destroying property that was technically in my name, issued based on a credit score I had built over a decade of 70-hour work weeks. But I didn't move. I forced my breathing to slow down, counting the inhales. 1, 2, 3. If I moved, he would win. If I cried, he would win. Gavin held up the 2 jagged halves of the card, the silver chips sliced perfectly down the middle. He dropped them onto the counter, where they clattered like dropped coins. He told me that was the last one. He said I was officially cut off. I looked at the shards of plastic. It was funny, in a sick way. That card had a limit of $50,000. It was the card I used to buy his mother's insulin, his dry cleaning, the organic kale he insisted on for his smoothies. He wasn't cutting off my luxuries, he was cutting off his own convenience, but he was too blinded by the rush of power to see it. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the island, invading my space with the smell of expensive espresso and that cedarwood aftershave I had bought him for Christmas. He told me that from this moment forward, I would have to submit a request for an allowance. My stomach dropped. An allowance. Like a teenager. Like a child. I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. I thought about the spreadsheet I used to manage at the firm, the millions of dollars I moved with a single keystroke. Now I was going to have to ask a grown man for $20 to buy tampons. He smiled, a tight, benevolent expression that didn't reach his eyes. He said he wanted an itemized list of my needs by Friday. He told me that if I could prove I was responsible, maybe we could discuss a prepaid debit card in a few months. But until then, cash only, and only when approved. I stared at him. I tried to find the man I married in that face, the man who used to ask my opinion on merger structures. He was gone. In his place was a petty tyrant who thought financial abuse was a parenting technique. I opened my mouth to argue, to cite the prenuptial agreement, to scream about community property laws, but my throat closed up. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. If I argued, he might escalate. He might take the car keys. He might lock me out. I had to play dead. I had to be the wounded animal he wanted to see. I lowered my eyes to the floor. I whispered that I understood. Gavin exhaled, a sound of supreme satisfaction. He reached out and patted my cheek, his palm dry and condescending. He said he knew I would be reasonable. He said this was for my own good, to help me learn the value of $1. I didn't flinch at his touch, though my skin crawled. I just stared at the marble floor, watching the sunlight reflect off the polished surface, and thought about the fact that the value of $1 is relative. To him, $1 was power. To me, right now, $1 was a weapon I was currently sharpening in the dark. The silence in the kitchen following Gavin's exit was heavy, but it wasn't empty. From the breakfast nook, the rustle of glossy paper announced that we weren't alone. Delilah was there. She was always there. I turned slowly. My mother-in-law was perched on the velvet banquette, a fashion magazine spread open on the table before her. She didn't look up. She took a sip of her herbal tea, the china cup looking delicate and dangerous in her manicured hand. She was wearing a silk robe that I knew for a fact cost $600 because I was the one who ordered it online for her birthday last month. She turned a page, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She spoke to the air, her voice light and conversational as if commenting on the weather. She said that hunger makes women behave. The words hit me like a physical slap. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the casualness of it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was simply stating a fact of her worldview, a philosophy she had clearly passed down to her son. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the perfectly coiffed silver hair, the rigid posture, the way she held herself like royalty in a house she didn't own. I remembered the day she moved in, 6 months ago. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks while her condo was renovated. Then the renovation turned into a remodel, and the remodel turned into an indefinite stay. She had slowly, methodically dismantled my authority in my own home, whispering poison into Gavin's ear until he started looking at me not as a wife, but as a failing employee. I wanted to ask her how she could sleep at night. I wanted to ask her if she remembered that I was the one who drove her to her physical therapy appointments, who cooked her gluten-free meals, who listened to her endless stories about her bridge club. But I knew the answer. She didn't care. To her, I was a utility, and a utility that malfunction needed to be turned off. Delilah finally looked up, her eyes bright with malice. She smiled, a mirror image of her son's toxic benevolence. She told me not to worry, sweetie. She said that once I learned my place, things would be so much easier for everyone. She said men just need to feel like they are in charge, and it was my job to let them. My hands shook. I hid them behind my back. I thought about the bank notification on my phone currently vibrating in my pocket. I thought about the balance, $2,150,000. I forced a tight, pained smile onto my face. I told her I had a headache and was going to lie down. She waved her hand dismissively, returning to her magazine. She told me to make sure I was up by 4 to start dinner. She reminded me that Gavin wanted the roast chicken tonight and not to dry it out like last time. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heels clicking on the hardwood. Every step away from her felt like a victory, and every step was a promise. I wouldn't dry out the chicken. I would burn the whole damn house down around them, metaphorically speaking. I closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. The plush carpet was soft against my legs, but I couldn't feel comfort. I could only feel the adrenaline crashing, leaving me shaking and cold. I looked around the room. It was a masterpiece of interior design. The beige curtains, the taupe throw pillows, the abstract art that matched the duvet. It was beautiful, and it was a prison. I pulled my knees to my chest. Who was I? The question bounced around my skull. 5 years ago, I was Cassidy Vance. I was a senior forensic accountant at Ross & Associates. I didn't just balance books, I interrogated them. I could look at a corporate ledger and see the ghost of a bribe hidden in a consulting fee. I could trace a wire transfer through 3 shell companies and a Cayman Island trust before my morning coffee. I was feared. I was respected. I made 6 figures and bought my own shoes. Then I met Gavin. He was charming, ambitious, and seemingly in awe of my brain. He told me he wanted to build an empire, and he wanted a partner who understood the numbers. It was a seduction, but not a sexual one. It was an intellectual seduction. Then came the ring. Then came the toxic benevolence. I remembered the night he asked me to quit. We were at dinner. He took my hand and looked at me with those soulful eyes. He told me I looked tired. He said he hated seeing me work so hard for other people. He said he wanted to take care of me so I could focus on us, on building our home, on preparing for a family. I was stupid. I was burnt out and tired of the corporate grind, and I mistook his control for care. I thought I was entering a partnership where I ran the domestic logistics and he ran the external operations. I looked at the vanity across the room. My CPA license was framed there, tucked behind a bottle of perfume, gathering dust. I wasn't a partner. I was a pet. And now I was a bad pet who had chewed on the furniture and needed to be disciplined. I stood up, my legs wobbly. I walked over to the vanity and picked up the perfume bottle. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my skin pale. I looked like a victim. But inside, something was shifting. The forensic accountant wasn't dead. She was just dormant, and she had just woken up. I remembered the wire transfer again. It wasn't luck. It was the result of the one smart thing I had done in this marriage. When I quit, Timothy Ross, my old boss, had given me a piece of advice. Keep a go bag, Cassidy. In this line of work and in life, you always keep a separate ledger. I had kept my pre-marriage savings in a high-yield account under my maiden name. I never touched it. I let the compound interest do its work. And 3 months ago, when Delilah moved in and the air in the house turned sour, I took a gamble. I used every cent of that savings to buy into a blind trust Timothy tipped me off about. Gavin thought I was broke. He thought he had cut the strings. He didn't know I had built a parachute out of gold. But I couldn't leave yet. Not today. If I left now, he would fight me. He would claim the money was marital assets. He would drag me through court until I bled dry. I needed leverage. I needed dirt. I needed to do what I did best, follow the money. My anxiety was a physical thing, a tight band around my chest that made it hard to draw a full breath. I needed my medication. I had been rationing my last refill of alprazolam for 2 weeks, taking half pills only when the shakes got too bad to hide. But the bottle was empty. I grabbed my purse. I knew Gavin had cut the credit cards, but surely the health savings account card would still work. That was for medical necessities. Even he wouldn't be that cruel. I drove to the pharmacy in the sleek black sedan Gavin insisted I drive because it reflected well on the company. My hands were sweating on the leather steering wheel. The pharmacy was busy. It was the after-work rush. A mother with a crying toddler was behind me. An elderly man coughing into a handkerchief was in front. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. When it was my turn, the pharmacist, a kind woman named Sarah who knew me by name, smiled. She placed the small white bag on the counter. She told me the total was $15.40. I slid the blue HSA card into the chip reader. I waited. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant tone. The screen read, "Declined." My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I smiled apologetically at Sarah. I told her the chip must be faulty. I wiped it on my sweater and inserted it again. Beep, declined. The line behind me shifted. Someone sighed, a long, impatient exhalation. The toddler started wailing louder. Sarah lowered her voice. She asked if I had another form of payment. I opened my wallet. It was empty. Gavin had cleared out the cash yesterday to count it, and he never put it back. I had my driver's license, a library card, and the useless shards of my platinum life. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. This was the design. This was the feature, not a bug. He wanted this. He wanted me standing in a public place, unable to pay for a $15 generic medication, feeling the weight of my own helplessness. I looked at Sarah. I whispered that I must have left my other card at home. I turned around, keeping my head high, ignoring the stares of the people in line. I walked out of the pharmacy, my legs feeling like lead. I got into the car, closed the door, and screamed. A silent scream, mouth open, throat straining, no sound coming out. He had cut off my medicine. The war was officially on. I pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, my eyes dry but burning. The house loomed in front of me, a sprawling monument to Gavin's ego. I parked the car and entered through the garage, moving quietly. I didn't want to see Delilah. I didn't want to see Gavin. I just wanted to get to the guest bathroom and splash cold water on my face. As I passed the study, the heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I heard Gavin's voice. He wasn't using his husband voice or even his tyrant voice. He was using his deal closer voice, low, fast, and brimming with excitement. I stopped. I knew I shouldn't listen. Eavesdropping was how you heard things that hurt you. but the accountant in me, the one who sniffed out fraud, took over. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, holding my breath. He was saying that the transfer needed to happen before the quarter closed. He said he didn't care about the penalties, just move it. My ears perked up. Quarter close, penalties, those were triggers. Then he said two words that made my blood run cold and then immediately hot. Project Sovereign. I frowned. I knew his project names. There was Project Skyline, the condos, Project Blue, the mall renovation. I had never heard of Project Sovereign. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then he laughed. He said not to worry about her. He said she was handled. He said she didn't have access to anything anymore, not even the grocery money. He said she was completely in the dark. He was talking about me. Then came the kicker. He said they needed to shelter the assets in the LLC before the zoning announcement went public on Monday. He said once the rezoning hit, the land value would quadruple, and he didn't want that equity showing up on the personal balance sheet just in case things got messy at home. I clamped a hand over my mouth. He wasn't just abusing me. He was hiding assets. He was preparing for a divorce, or at least positioning himself so that if I left, I would leave with nothing. He was defrauding the marital estate. This wasn't just a bad marriage anymore. This was a financial crime. I crept away from the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I went into the laundry room and locked the door. I sat on the washing machine and stared at the wall. Project Sovereign. Zoning announcement. Monday. I had a timeline. I had a name. And I had a motive. I waited until 2 in the morning. Gavin was asleep. I could hear his rhythmic snoring from the master bedroom down the hall. Delilah was in the guest suite, presumably dreaming of new ways to critique my dusting. I slipped out of bed, wearing my thick wool socks to dampen the sound of my footsteps. I crept down the hallway to the study. The door was closed now. I turned the handle. Locked. Of course. He never used to lock it. I knelt down and felt along the top of the door frame. Nothing. I checked under the hallway rug. Nothing. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a paperclip. I wasn't a spy, but I had locked myself out of enough bathrooms to know how to pick a simple privacy lock. I straightened the wire, inserted it into the hole, and felt for the mechanism. A soft click. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and secrets. I went to the desk and woke up the computer. The login screen glowed blue in the darkness. I typed in his usual password, Gavin Builder. Incorrect password. I tried his birthday. Incorrect password. I tried Delilah's birthday. Incorrect password. I tried the name of his first dog. Incorrect password. I stared at the screen. System locked. Try again in 30 minutes. I sat back in the leather chair, frustration gnawing at me. He had changed everything. He had anticipated this. He knew I was smart, and he had built a firewall. I looked around the desk. It was clean. Too clean. No papers, no files. He had sanitized the physical space just like he had sanitized the digital one. My eyes landed on the trash can. Empty. I felt a surge of panic. If I couldn't get into the computer, I couldn't prove Project Sovereign existed. I couldn't prove he was hiding assets. I would be walking into a divorce court with nothing but a he said, she said story, and he had the high-priced lawyers. I needed a back door. I closed my eyes and tried to think. Who handled his IT? Who managed his files? His executive assistant? But which one? He went through them like tissues. There was Sarah? No, fired, Jessica, quit. Then I remembered her. Beatrice. Beatrice was the assistant he fired last month. I remembered the rant he went on about her. He said she was incompetent, messy, and stole K-cups from the break room. He had fired her on a Friday afternoon and had security escort her out. But here was the thing about Gavin. He was lazy. He hated doing his own backups. I remembered a dinner conversation 2 months ago. He was complaining that Beatrice insisted on backing up the email server to a physical drive because she didn't trust the cloud. He had mocked her for it. A physical drive. If Beatrice was as messy as Gavin said, maybe she still had it. If she was as angry as I suspected she was, maybe she would share it. I didn't have access to the computer, but I had access to people. And I had access to $2 million in a secret account that Gavin didn't know existed. I stood up. I couldn't hack the machine. But I could definitely hack the disgruntled employee. I sat in my car 3 blocks away from our house, the engine idling. I told Gavin I was going to the library to research budget-friendly recipes, a lie that made him smile that tight, patronizing smile of his. He told me he was proud of my initiative. I wanted to vomit. I stared at the steering wheel and tried to summon the ghost of the woman who used to run an entire department. I needed to find Beatrice. The problem was, I knew almost nothing about her personal life. Gavin treated his assistants like appliances. You didn't ask a toaster about its weekend. I closed my eyes and forced my brain to replay the few interactions I had with her. She was young, maybe 24. She had dyed black hair with purple tips that she tried to hide in a messy bun. She wore heavy eyeliner. I thought about the day she was fired. I had come into the office to drop off Gavin's dry cleaning because he refused to use a delivery service. Beatrice was packing a cardboard box, crying. She had looked at me, her mascara running, and said something strange. She said she hoped I liked the smell of sulfur because I was living with a demon. I had dismissed it then as the rambling of a terminated employee. Now I realized it was a warning. But where did she go? I didn't have her phone number. Her personnel file was in the office I couldn't access. Then I remembered the coffee. 3 months ago, I had run into her at a coffee shop downtown, a place called The Grind. It was far from the office, in a grittier part of the city. I had been surprised to see her there. She had laughed, a cynical, raspy sound, and told me she practically lived in the apartment complex next door because the rent was the only thing she could afford on the salary Gavin paid her. The apartments next to The Grind. It was a long shot, a desperate thread, but it was the only one I had. I put the car in gear. I wasn't an investigator, but I was a woman with nothing left to lose, and that was a dangerous substitute for a badge. The apartment complex was a sprawling beige monstrosity that looked like it had been built in the 70s and ignored ever since. I didn't know her apartment number, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the dive bar on the ground floor. It was 11 in the morning, but inside the Rusty Nail, it was perpetual midnight. The air smelled of stale beer and lemon cleaner, a combination that made my stomach turn. I walked in, my designer loafers sticking slightly to the floor. There were 3 people in the bar, a bartender wiping a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the glass, an old man asleep in a booth, and a young woman sitting at the end of the bar, staring into a half-empty pint glass. It was her. She looked rougher than I remembered. Her hair was down, the purple tips faded to a dull gray lavender. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt that swallowed her frame. I walked over and sat on the stool next to her. She didn't look up. I said her name softly. Beatrice. She stiffened. Her hand tightened around her glass. She turned her head slowly, and when her eyes met mine, they weren't filled with recognition. They were filled with hate. She asked what I was doing there. She asked if the wicked witch of the West sent me to make sure she was sufficiently miserable. I told her that Delilah didn't send me. I told her Gavin didn't know I was there. Beatrice scoffed. She turned back to her drink. She said she didn't have anything to say to me. She said I was just as bad as him, walking around in my $1,000 coat while he destroyed people's lives. I looked down at my coat. It was cashmere. It did cost $1,000, and right now it felt like a costume. I told her she was right. I told her I had been blind. I lowered my voice. I told her that yesterday he cut up my credit cards and put me on an allowance. Beatrice paused. She looked at me again, searching my face for the lie. She didn't find one. She asked if I was serious. I nodded. I told her he was hiding assets. I told her he was planning something called Project Sovereign. The name hit a nerve. Beatrice's eyes widened. She set her glass down hard. She whispered that she knew it. She said she knew he was up to something shady with those land surveys. The tension in the air shifted from hostility to curiosity. I needed to seal the deal. I needed to buy her a drink, a peace offering. I reached for my purse, and then I remembered. I had no cash. My wallet was a leather graveyard of canceled plastic. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't buy a $5 beer. I was sitting on a secret fortune of $2 million, and I couldn't buy a cheap lager. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. Beatrice watched me fumble. She saw the hesitation, the empty wallet. She let out a short, bark-like laugh. She said I really was broke. She said she thought I was joking, but I really didn't have a dime. I admitted it. I told her I had nothing. I told her I was trapped. Beatrice stared at me for a long moment. Then she signaled the bartender. She held up 2 fingers. She bought me a beer. She slid the bottle toward me. She said it looked like we were both screwed by the same man. I took a sip. It was bitter and cold, and it tasted like salvation. I leaned in. I asked her about the backups. I asked if she really kept a physical drive of the server. Beatrice nodded. She said she didn't trust Gavin as far as she could throw him. She said she backed up everything every Friday, emails, invoices, the deleted items folder. She said she called it her Doomsday Drive. My heart hammered. That drive was the smoking gun. It was the leverage I needed to force a settlement, to expose the fraud, to get my life back. I asked her where it was. Beatrice hesitated. She looked down at her hands. She said that was the problem. She said she had been living out of her car for the last week because she couldn't make rent. She said she was sleeping in the back seat of her Toyota Corolla. I felt a pang of guilt. While I was crying about my allowance in a mansion, she was homeless because my husband fired her. I asked her where the car was now. She took a long swallow of beer. She said it was at the city impound lot. She said they towed it last night while she was sleeping because she was parked in a permit zone. The impound lot. My stomach twisted. I asked her how much it cost to get it out. Beatrice pulled a crumpled piece of pink carbon paper from her sweatshirt pocket. She flattened it out on the bar. I read the citation. The towing fee was $150. The storage fee was $50 a day. The outstanding tickets she hadn't paid totaled $280. The total at the bottom of the page read $480. It might as well have been $4 million. Beatrice looked at me. She said she had $20 to her name. She asked if I had anything stashed away. I thought about the secret account. I could wire the money to myself, but it would take days to clear, and it would leave a paper trail. I couldn't go to the bank and withdraw cash without an ID check that might flag the system if Gavin had put a freeze on my credit. I shook my head. I told her I couldn't access my money without alerting him. Beatrice slumped. She said that without the money, the car stayed there. And if the car stayed there, the drive stayed in the glove box. And if we didn't get it out within 10 days, they would auction the car off with the evidence inside. We had a deadline on top of a deadline. I looked at the pink slip again. $480. I looked at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. I saw the cashmere coat. I saw the designer bag. And then I saw the earrings. They were diamond studs, simple and elegant. Gavin had given them to me for our 2nd anniversary. The same night he made a joke about my cooking in front of his partners. I had worn them like a badge of ownership. I reached up and touched the cold metal. I told Beatrice to finish her beer. I told her we were going shopping. The pawn shop was 3 doors down from the bar. It had bars on the windows and a sign that said, "We buy gold," in neon letters that flickered ominously. I had never been in a pawn shop. I felt like an intruder, a tourist in a land of desperation. The man behind the counter was thick-set, with heavy rings on his fingers and eyes that had seen every version of a lie. I took off the earrings. I placed them on the scratched glass counter. I told him they were real diamonds, high clarity, platinum setting. I told him they were insured for $2,000. He didn't look impressed. He picked up a jeweler's loupe and screwed it into his eye socket. He examined the stones in silence. The silence stretched out, filled only by the ticking of 100 second-hand watches on the wall. He spat the loupe out. He said he would give me $200. My jaw dropped. I told him that was robbery. I told him the platinum alone was worth more than that. He shrugged. He said diamonds have no resale value. He said he had a drawer full of wedding rings from failed marriages and anniversary gifts from cheating husbands. He said $200 was the offer. Take it or leave it. I looked at Beatrice. She was standing by the door, arms crossed, watching me. She needed her car. I needed the drive. I felt a surge of cold rage. This was what it meant to be desperate. This was the reality Delilah thought would break me. I leaned over the counter. I channeled every ounce of my former corporate authority. I told him I needed $480. I told him if he gave me that, I would throw in the cashmere coat I was wearing. He looked at the coat. He looked at the label. He looked back at the earrings. He pulled a calculator toward him. He punched in some numbers. He grunted. He said $450. I told him $480, not a penny less. He stared at me. I stared back. I wasn't Cassidy the housewife anymore. I was Cassidy the negotiator. He sighed. He opened the register. He counted out the bills. $480 in worn, greasy 20s. I took the money. I took off my coat and folded it on the counter. I walked out of the shop in my silk blouse, shivering in the cold air, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The impound lot was a graveyard of metal located under the highway overpass. The noise of traffic above was deafening. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass took the cash without looking at me. He stamped the release form and slid a key across the metal tray. He pointed to row G. He said, "Good luck." We walked through the rows of dusty, battered cars. My arms were covered in goosebumps from the cold. Beatrice spotted her Corolla. It was sandwiched between a rusted pickup truck and a van with a smashed windshield. She unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. She turned the key. The engine made a clicking sound. Click, click, click. Then silence. Beatrice slammed her hand against the steering wheel. She screamed a curse word. She said the battery was dead. I looked at the car. The glove box was locked. Beatrice tried the handle. She said the latch was broken. It only opened when the car was running because of some electrical short. It was a quirk she had never fixed. We needed to jump the car, but we had no cables and no other car. I looked at the position of the Corolla. It was on a slight incline. If we could push it backward, maybe we could pop the clutch. Beatrice said it was a manual transmission. I nodded. I told her to put it in neutral. I moved to the front of the car. I placed my hands on the cold, gritty hood. I was wearing a silk blouse and dress slacks. My shoes were Italian leather. I dug my heels into the gravel. I pushed. The car didn't move. Beatrice yelled from the window. She told me to put my back into it. I gritted my teeth. I thought about Gavin cutting my credit cards. I thought about Delilah sipping her tea. I thought about the $2 million sitting in the dark, waiting for me. I pushed harder. I felt my nails break against the metal. I felt the sweat trickle down my back despite the cold. I groaned, a primal sound of effort. The wheels turned, just an inch, then another. I pushed until my lungs burned. The car rolled backward, gathering speed. Beatrice shouted. She threw it into gear and popped the clutch. The engine sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. Blue smoke poured out of the tailpipe. I collapsed against the side of the rusted pickup truck next to me, gasping for air. My hands were black with grease. My blouse was ruined. Beatrice scrambled across the seat. She fiddled with the glove box. It popped open. She reached in and pulled out a small silver rectangle, a USB drive. She held it up through the open window. She grinned, her teeth crooked and real. She said we got him. I looked at the drive. It was small, unassuming, but it contained the bomb that would blow up my husband's life. I wiped the grease from my hands onto my pants. I didn't care about the stain. I climbed into the passenger seat of the beat-up Corolla. I told her to drive. The internet cafe was tucked into the back of a laundromat. a row of ancient computers sitting under flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. It smelled of dryer sheets and stale coffee. Beatrice sat next to me, her knee bouncing nervously against the underside of the desk. I plugged the silver USB drive into the tower. The computer groaned, the fan spinning up as if the effort of reading Gavin's secrets was physically heavy. A window popped up on the screen. I opened the folder labeled Backup Friday. Beatrice was organized. I had to give her that. Inside were subfolders organized by date. I went to the most recent one. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, so I started with the deleted items. Gavin was the kind of man who thought hitting delete made things disappear from the universe. He didn't understand server retention policies. I scrolled through a dozen emails about golf tee times and complaints to the country club board about the texture of the towels. Then I saw it, an email chain with the subject line, Project Sovereign. I opened it. My eyes scanned the text, melting the information into a narrative in my head. It was an email from Gavin to his lawyer. He was asking if the shell company, Sovereign Holdings, was ready to receive the asset. He explicitly stated that he wanted the transfer of funds to appear as a loss on the main company books for the current quarter to lower his reported income. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He was actively suppressing his income to lower potential alimony payments. He was planning the divorce already. I clicked on the attachment, a PDF map of the city. A large red outline encompassed a 20-acre plot of land on the east side, right next to the river. I recognized the area. It was a floodplain, swampy, undeveloped, and notorious for smelling like sulfur in the summer. Why would he want that? I opened the next document, a land appraisal. The text described the property as marshland with limited residential potential due to flood risks. The valuation was pitifully low. The asking price was $300,000, but Gavin wasn't stupid. He wouldn't leverage the house and hide assets to buy a swamp unless the swamp was about to turn into gold. I went back to the file list. There had to be something else, a reason for the purchase. I found a folder named Environmental Reports. I clicked it. A heavy PDF loaded, filled with technical jargon about water tables and thermal conductivity. I used to read these for breakfast at the firm. I skipped the boilerplate and went to the conclusion. The report wasn't about building condos, it was about cooling capacity. The site had been approved for high-volume water intake from the river. My brain made the connection instantly. High water intake, floodplain isolation, proximity to the new power grid extension. It wasn't a residential development, it was a data center. I realized with a jolt of adrenaline that Gavin wasn't building houses. He was buying the land to flip it to a tech giant. The federal government had just announced a grant for domestic server farms. This swamp was the only plot of land in the county that met the cooling requirements. I did the math in my head. He was buying the land for $300,000. Once the rezoning was announced on Monday, that land would be worth $10 million, minimum. And he was using marital funds to buy it, funneling the ownership into a secret LLC so that when he served me divorce papers next month, the $10 million would be legally his, and I would be left fighting for half of a house he had already leveraged to the hilt. I looked at Beatrice. She was chewing on her thumbnail, watching a loading bar on her phone. I told her I knew what he was doing. I told her he was going to be rich, filthy rich. Beatrice looked at the screen. She asked if that meant we could sue him. I shook my head. Suing took years. By the time a court froze his assets, he would have moved the money offshore. We didn't need a lawsuit. We needed to beat him to the closing table. I looked at the date on the purchase agreement draft. The closing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. He hadn't bought it yet. I felt a smile spread across my face, a terrifying, manic expression that made Beatrice pull back slightly. He was waiting for the funds to clear into his shell account. He was waiting until Monday to avoid suspicion. That was his mistake. He was arrogant. He thought he was the only predator in the water. I needed a lawyer, and I needed one who hated Gavin as much as I did. I pulled my phone out, then shoved it back into my purse. Gavin might have tracking software on it. If he saw me at a laundromat in the bad part of town, he would ask questions. I asked Beatrice for her phone. She handed it over. The screen was cracked, but it had a dial tone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years, but one my fingers remembered like a piano chord. It rang 3 times. Then a deep, familiar voice answered. Timothy Ross. I didn't say hello. I said I needed a favor, and I needed it within the hour. There was a pause. Timothy asked if that was Cassidy. He sounded shocked, like he was hearing from a ghost. I told him it was. I told him I was in trouble. The kind of trouble that involved 7 figures and a husband who thought he was smarter than the IRS. Timothy didn't ask for details over the phone. He was a professional. He simply asked where I was. I told him I was coming to him. He hesitated. He said he had a client meeting in 20 minutes. I told him to cancel it. I told him I was bringing him the biggest corporate fraud case he would see all year, and I was going to pay his retainer in cash. Well, wire transfer. He laughed, a dry, dusty sound. He said he would tell his secretary to expect me. I hung up and handed the phone back to Beatrice. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer velocity of the plan forming in my mind. I stood up. I looked down at my ruined blouse, the grease stain from the car hood smeared across the silk. I looked at my bare earlobes where the diamonds used to be. I told Beatrice we had to go. I told her she was driving me to the financial district. Walking into the marble lobby of Ross & Associates, wearing a grease-stained blouse and smelling of exhaust fumes, was a humbling experience. The receptionist, a girl young enough to be my daughter with skin that looked like it had never seen stress, looked me up and down with undisguised horror. She asked if I had a delivery. I walked past her desk. I told her I was here to see Mr. Ross. She started to protest, reaching for the phone to call security, but the double doors opened and Timothy stepped out. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was whiter, his suit more expensive. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes took in the disheveled hair, the stain, the wild look in my eyes. He didn't flinch. He waved the receptionist down. He told her I was a VIP. We went into his office, a corner suite with a view of the city skyline. I sat in one of the leather chairs, careful not to lean back and transfer grease onto the upholstery. I laid it all out. The credit cards, the allowance, the Project Sovereign emails, the data center. Timothy listened in silence, his fingers steepled together. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. He said Gavin was reckless. He said hiding assets in anticipation of divorce was fraud, but proving it was messy. I told him I didn't want to prove it. I wanted to buy the land out from under him. Timothy raised an eyebrow. He asked if I had the capital. I told him I had $2 million in the account he helped me set up. He nodded slowly. He said the land was only $300,000. I told him I wanted to buy the land, but I also wanted to buy the adjacent plots, the access roads. I wanted to own the only way in and out of that data center. I wanted to put Gavin in a position where he had to negotiate with me to make his deal work. Timothy smiled. It was the smile of a shark recognizing another shark. He opened his laptop. He said we needed a vehicle. He said we couldn't use my name. I told him to call it Phoenix Rising Holdings. It was cliché, but I felt entitled to a little melodrama. He typed furiously. He said he could fast-track the LLC registration. He said he could act as the registered agent so my name wouldn't appear on public records. He printed out a stack of documents. I signed them without reading the fine print, trusting him because I had no other choice. He said the LLC was live. He said now I just needed to fund it. The bank was 3 blocks away. It was a different branch than the one Gavin used, thank God. It was the bank where I had kept my secret account for 5 years. I left Beatrice in the car with the hazard lights on. I walked into the bank at 4 o'clock. They closed at 5. The air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. The silence inside was oppressive. I walked to the teller window. The teller was a young man with a name tag that read, Kevin. I slid my debit card across the counter. I told him I needed to initiate a wire transfer. Kevin looked at the card. He looked at me. He looked at the grease stain on my shirt. He asked for my identification. I pulled my driver's license from my wallet. My hand shook slightly. In the photo, I was polished, smiling, wearing a blazer. In person, I looked like a woman on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Kevin typed something into his computer. He frowned. He said the system was flagging the transaction due to the size and the deviation from my normal spending patterns. He said he needed to ask a few security questions. My heart hammered against my ribs. Deviation from patterns. Of course. I hadn't touched this money in years. He asked for my mother's maiden name. I answered. Sterling. He typed. He didn't look up. He asked for the name of the street I grew up on. I answered. Maplewood. He paused. He looked at the screen, then back at me. He asked for the amount of the last deposit I made. My mind went blank. The last deposit? That was 3 years ago. I had set it up to auto-transfer and then stopped it when Gavin got suspicious. I closed my eyes. I tried to visualize the ledger. I tried to see the spreadsheet in my mind. I whispered that it was $15,000. Kevin stared at me. The silence stretched for an eternity. I could hear the hum of the security cameras. I could feel the eyes of the guard by the door. Finally, Kevin nodded. He said that was correct. He pushed a keypad toward me. He asked me to enter the routing number for the destination account. I pulled the slip of paper Timothy had given me from my pocket. I typed in the numbers for the Phoenix Rising Holdings account. I typed in the amount, $2 million. I left $150,000 in the account, just in case. Kevin looked at the amount. He swallowed hard. He printed a receipt and slid it across the counter. He asked me to sign. I signed my name. It looked different than before. Sharper. Angrier. I walked out of the bank and got back into Beatrice's Corolla. I felt lightheaded. I had just liquidated my entire life's safety net. I was all in. I showed Beatrice the receipt, $2 million pending transfer. Beatrice whistled. She said that was a lot of zeros. I checked my watch. It was 4:30. Dinner was at 6. I had 90 minutes to get home, shower, hide the grease-stained clothes, and get a roast chicken in the oven. I told Beatrice to drive fast. She peeled away from the curb, the Corolla's exhaust pipe rattling. We hit traffic on the bridge. I watched the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. 4:40, 4:45. I closed my eyes and visualized the map of the city. I visualized the swampland. I visualized Gavin's face when he realized he had been beaten. We pulled up a block away from my house at 5:15. I couldn't risk Gavin seeing the Corolla. I reached into my purse and pulled out the remaining cash from the pawn shop. I handed Beatrice $200. I told her to get a hotel room. I told her to keep the drive safe. I told her I would call her. Beatrice took the money. She looked at me with a new kind of respect. She said to give him hell. I got out of the car and started running. I ran past the manicured lawns of my neighbors. I ran past the security gates. I ran until my lungs burned and my side stitched. I slipped into the house through the garage side door at 5:25. The house was quiet. I sprinted up the back stairs to the bedroom. I stripped off the ruined clothes and shoved them into the back of my closet, wrapped in a dry cleaning bag. I jumped into the shower, scrubbing the grease from my hands and the sweat from my body. I was dressed in a clean lounge set and standing in the kitchen by 5:45. I pulled the chicken from the fridge. My hands were steady. When Gavin walked through the door at 6 o'clock, I was chopping vegetables. The oven was preheated. He walked in, loosening his tie. He looked at me, scanning for cracks. He looked for the misery he had prescribed. I turned and smiled. It was the best lie I had ever told. I asked him how his day was. He smirked. He said it was productive. He said he was closing a big deal next week. I nodded. I said that sounded wonderful. I thought about the wire transfer floating through the digital ether. I thought about the land that was about to be mine. I thought, yes, Gavin, it's going to be very productive. The weekend stretched out before me like a desert I had to cross without water. Saturday morning arrived with a suffocating brightness. I woke up before Gavin, my body humming with a terrified energy that I had to mask with stillness. I lay there listening to his breathing, the deep rhythmic inhale of a man who sleeps the sleep of the righteous. He had no idea that while he dreamed of his empire, I had just bought the ground out from under it. I went downstairs to make coffee. My hands shook as I measured the grounds. 1 scoop, 2 scoops. I had to be perfect. I had to be the chastened wife who had learned her lesson. When Gavin came down, he was in a mood that chilled me to the bone. He was happy. He hummed as he poured his coffee. He kissed me on the forehead, a dry, proprietary peck that made my skin crawl. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his money clip. He peeled off a single $20 bill and placed it on the counter. He told me he was pleased with dinner last night. He said the chicken was excellent, not dry at all. He said he wanted to reward my effort. I stared at the bill. Alexander Jackson's face looked up at me, mocking. $20. This was my reward for being a good servant. 2 days ago, I had moved $2 million across the city. Today, I was being tipped like a waitress in my own kitchen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to crumple the bill and throw it in his face. I wanted to tell him that I owned him. My throat tightened, the words clawing at the back of my tongue, but I swallowed them. I forced the bile down. I picked up the bill. I said thank you. I said I would use it wisely. Gavin smiled, that beatific, toxic smile. He said he knew I would. He said he liked this new dynamic. He said it felt more natural, more balanced. He said he felt like I was finally letting him lead, and that made him love me more. I lowered my eyes so he wouldn't see the hatred burning there. I tucked the $20 into my pocket. It wasn't money, it was fuel. Every time I felt weak, every time I felt like confessing, I would touch that bill and remember exactly what he thought I was worth. Sunday morning brought a new horror. I walked into the kitchen to find Delilah standing in the center of the room, looking like a general surveying a battlefield. She was wearing a crisp white linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. She told me she had some news. She said she had let Maria go. I froze. Maria had been our housekeeper for 3 years. She had 3 kids. She relied on this job. I asked why. My voice was thin, strained. Delilah took a sip of her tea. She said she did it for me. She said she had been watching me, and she felt that I was adrift. She said I had too much time on my hands to brood and plot and feel sorry for myself. She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her fingers dug in slightly, a pinch disguised as a caress. She said that manual labor was good for the soul. She said that scrubbing a floor on your hands and knees taught humility. She said she wanted me to feel the pride of keeping a home, truly keeping it, not just managing the people who did the work. She pointed to the bucket and mop in the corner. She said the foyer marble was looking a bit dull. I looked at the bucket. Then I looked at her. She wasn't asking. She was commanding. I could have refused. I could have walked out. But I had to buy time until Monday. I had to keep them comfortable. I had to keep them blind. I walked over to the bucket. I filled it with water. I knelt down on the cold, hard stone of the foyer. Delilah stood over me, watching. She said I missed a spot. She said to use more elbow grease. I scrubbed. The chemical smell of the cleaner filled my nose. My knees ached. My manicure, already ruined from the car repair, chipped further. I scrubbed, and I visualized the map of the city. I visualized the swampland. I visualized the data center. With every circular motion of the sponge, I repeated a mantra in my head. Phoenix rising. Phoenix rising. Phoenix rising. I wasn't scrubbing a floor. I was scrubbing away their future. I was erasing their name from the deed. I cleaned until the marble shone like a mirror, reflecting the face of a woman who was done being a victim. Sunday night, the air in the house was so thick with tension it felt flammable. I was in the library pretending to read a book, but actually staring at the same paragraph for an hour. My burner phone was hidden inside a hollowed-out volume of an encyclopedia on the top shelf, silent but present. Suddenly, the front door slammed open. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. I jumped. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had Timothy called him? Did the bank notify him of the LLC registration? Did he know? Gavin stormed into the library. His face was red, a vein throbbing in his temple. He threw his briefcase onto the sofa. He screamed a curse word. He kicked the ottoman. I stood up, clutching my book to my chest like a shield. I asked what happened. He turned to me, his eyes wild. He said it was that ungrateful little brat, Beatrice. I stopped breathing. Beatrice. He found her. He knew. I gripped the book tighter. I prepared myself. I calculated the distance to the door. If he came at me, I would have to run. He paced the room. He said his lawyers had reached out to her to sign a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding her termination, just to tie up loose ends before the big deal closed. He said she told them to go to hell. He said she told the lawyer that she didn't sign papers for demons. I felt the blood rush back into my head. He didn't know about the drive. He didn't know about me. He was just angry that she had defied him. He ranted. He said she was unstable. He said he should have fired her months ago. He said people like her, people who didn't understand loyalty, were the reason the world was going to hell. He looked at me. He pointed a finger at my face. He said I better not be talking to her. He said if he found out I was communicating with a disgruntled employee, there would be consequences. I shook my head. I widened my eyes. I told him I hadn't spoken to her in months. I told him he was right. She always seemed a bit off. He huffed, adjusting his tie. He said he was going to have a drink. He said I should go to bed. I watched him walk to the wet bar. My knees were shaking so hard I had to sit down. It was a near miss, a bullet that grazed the ear. But it confirmed one thing. Beatrice was holding the line. She was strong, and if she was strong, I had to be stronger. Monday morning, the day the world changed. I was up at 6. I had the television in the kitchen turned on, the volume low. I was making omelets, the rhythmic whisking of eggs serving as a metronome for my anxiety. Gavin came down at 7. He was dressed in his power suit, a navy blue Italian cut that cost more than Beatrice's car. He looked like a king on his coronation day. He sat at the table and opened his tablet. He told me to turn up the news. I reached for the remote. My hand didn't shake this time. I turned the volume up. The local news anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a serious expression, was standing in front of a graphic of the city map. The headline read, "Mayor Announces Technology Initiative." Gavin leaned forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He said, "Here it comes." He said, "Watch this." The anchor announced that the city had received a federal grant to establish a new data processing hub. She said the project would revitalize the East Side Industrial District. Then, the map zoomed in. A red border appeared around the floodplain, the very land I had instructed Timothy to buy. The anchor said that the centerpiece of the project would be a massive, state-of-the-art data center located on the riverfront. Gavin slammed his hand on the table. He laughed, a loud, booming sound of pure triumph. He said he told me. He said he was a genius. He said that Swamp was going to buy us a vacation home in the Alps. He looked at me, his eyes shining. He said this was why he made the decisions, Cassidy. He said this was why I needed to trust him. He said he saw value where other people saw mud. I smiled. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I poured him a cup of coffee. I said he was right. I said he certainly had an eye for opportunity. Inside, I was screaming with laughter. He was right. He did see value. He just didn't own it anymore. The news anchor hadn't mentioned the owner's name yet. She just said private developers. Gavin didn't know that the private developer was the woman pouring his coffee, the woman he had put on a $20 allowance. He was cheering for his own execution. Monday evening was supposed to be a celebration. Gavin had ordered sushi, the expensive kind with gold leaf on the tuna. He opened a bottle of Dom Perignon. Delilah was there, beaming, raising her glass to her son's brilliance. I sat there, sipping water, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It happened at 8 o'clock. Gavin was scrolling through his emails on his phone. He frowned. He tapped the screen a few times, then swiped down to refresh. He muttered that it was strange. Delilah asked what was wrong. Gavin said he hadn't received the confirmation from his lawyer. He said the wire transfer for the purchase was supposed to go out this morning to lock it in before the price jumped, but he hadn't gotten the DocuSign receipt. He dialed a number. He put the phone to his ear. I watched him. I took a small bite of a cucumber roll. He left a voicemail. He said to call him back immediately. He put the phone down. He looked annoyed. He said lawyers were useless. He said they probably just missed the filing deadline for the day. Then his phone pinged, an automated alert from the real estate listing service he subscribed to. He picked it up. He read the notification. His face went pale. The color drained out of him so fast it looked like a magic trick. He whispered no. Delilah leaned forward. She asked what it was. Gavin looked up. His eyes were unfocused. He said the listing status had changed. He said it was marked as sold. Delilah clapped her hands. She said that was good. She said that meant his lawyer bought it. Gavin shook his head slowly. He said no. He said the status code was wrong. He said if his lawyer had bought it, it would say pending inspection. It said sold, cash close. He said someone else bought it. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I put my chopsticks down. I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. I asked if that was bad. He ignored me. He started typing furiously on his phone. He was logging into the county clerk's public access portal. It updated in real time. He typed in the parcel number. I knew the number by heart. He stared at the screen. His mouth opened slightly. He said the owner wasn't Sovereign Holdings. He said the owner was Phoenix Rising Holdings. He looked up at Delilah. He asked who the hell Phoenix Rising was. Tuesday morning broke with the violence of a storm. Gavin hadn't slept. He had spent the night pacing the study, screaming at his lawyers on the phone. I sat at the breakfast table, my hands wrapped around a warm mug. I was exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind you feel after running a marathon. The phone rang at 7:30. Not Gavin's cell, the house landline. Gavin snatched it from the cradle on the wall. He barked his name into the receiver. I watched his back. I saw the muscles in his neck tense. He listened. He said that was impossible. He said there had to be a mistake. He turned around, the cord twisting around his finger. He looked at me, but he wasn't seeing me. He was seeing his fortune evaporating. He asked the person on the other line who the principal of the LLC was. He said he wanted a name. He said he would sue them for interference. He listened again. His face changed. Confusion replaced the anger, then shock, then something darker. He lowered the phone slowly. He didn't hang it up. He just let his hand drop to his side. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Delilah walked in, wearing her silk robe. She asked what the lawyer said. Gavin didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on me. He said the bank didn't call. He said that was the title company. He said they verified the identity of the buyer for the final deed recording. He took a step toward me. He said the principal of Phoenix Rising Holdings was listed as Cassidy Vance. Delilah dropped her teacup. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid splashing across the marble I had scrubbed yesterday. Gavin's voice was a whisper, a terrifying, quiet sound. He asked what I did. I stood up. I didn't tremble. I didn't look down. I looked him in the eye. I said, I invested my allowance. The silence in the kitchen was heavy enough to crush bones. Gavin stood frozen, his hand still hovering near the phone, staring at me as if I had just spoken in a dead language. His brain was trying to reject the information, grinding against the reality that his submissive, allowance-begging wife had just outmaneuvered him on the biggest deal of his life. He finally spoke, his voice shaking with a desperate, manic laughter. He said I was lying. He said this was some kind of sick joke. He told me I didn't have $2 million. He said I couldn't even afford my own anxiety medication. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I told him that I couldn't afford the medication because he cut off my access to the joint funds, but I reminded him that before I was his wife, I was a partner at a top financial firm. I told him that while he was buying cars to impress his friends, I was compounding interest. Delilah stepped over the shards of her broken teacup. She looked at Gavin, her face twisting into a mask of panic. She told him to call the police. She said I must have stolen it. She said I must have embezzled it from the company accounts. I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that made them both flinch. I told them to go ahead. I told them to call the police and invite them to look at the books. I said that if the police came, they might be very interested in a shell company called Sovereign Holdings and why it was set up to hide marital assets right before a divorce filing. Gavin's face went from pale to gray. The air left his lungs in a rush. He slumped against the counter, the fight draining out of him as he realized I wasn't just guessing. I knew. I walked over to the kitchen island, invading his territory. I placed my phone on the counter, face up. I told him that I had a friend named Beatrice. Gavin flinched at the name. I continued. I said that Beatrice was a very organized employee. I said she kept backups. I told him that I had spent the weekend reading every email, every draft, and every environmental report he thought he had deleted. I leaned in close, smelling the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne turning sour. I told him I knew the land was a floodplain. I knew about the data center grant. I knew he had leveraged this house, our house, to get the liquidity to buy the land today. I watched the realization hit him. He had taken a bridge loan against the mansion to buy the swamp, planning to flip it immediately and pay off the debt. But he hadn't bought the swamp. I had. Now he had a massive loan due in 30 days and no asset to sell. He was underwater. I told him that he was technically homeless. He just didn't know it yet. Delilah screeched. She lunged at me, her red nails hooked like claws. She shouted that I was a witch. She shouted that I had ruined everything. I didn't step back. I grabbed her wrist mid-air. My grip was iron. I had spent 3 days scrubbing floors and pushing cars. I was stronger than I looked. I shoved her hand away. I told her to sit down. I told her that if she touched me again, I would press charges for assault, and unlike her son, I could afford a very good lawyer. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook I had kept for 6 months. It was worn at the edges, heavy with the weight of my humiliation. I opened it to the first page. I told them that before we discussed the price of the land, we were going to discuss the price of my dignity. I read the first entry. November 12th. Delilah told me I should stop eating bread because I was looking puffy. Gavin laughed and said he liked a little cushion. I flipped the page. December 4th. Gavin told me I wasn't allowed to speak about politics at the dinner party because I didn't understand the real world. I flipped again. The pages fluttered, a sound like a deck of cards being shuffled. I read the entry from Friday, the tampon speech. I looked at Gavin. I asked him if he remembered that. I asked him how it felt to tell his wife she had to submit an application for basic hygiene products. Gavin had his head in his hands. He whispered that he was sorry. He said he was stressed. He said he didn't mean it. I slammed the notebook shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous kitchen. I told him he did mean it. I told him he loved it. I said he got off on the power, on making me small so he could feel big. I told him that the price of the land just went up. Gavin looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He asked what I wanted. He begged. He said we could be partners. He said we could split the profits 50-50. He said he would fire his mother. He would do anything. I looked at Delilah. She was trembling, clutching her silk robe at the throat. I told him that was a good start. I laid out the reality. I owned the land. He owned a debt he couldn't pay. If I refused to sell, the bank would foreclose on this house in a month. He would lose his company, his reputation, and his precious status. I told him I was willing to sell the land to him. Hope flickered in his eyes. He asked, how much? I told him the price was $10 million. He choked. He said the grant was only for $12 million. He said that would leave him with almost no profit after taxes and paying off the bridge loan. I shrugged. I said that sounded like a personal problem. I said he could take the deal and break even, keeping his reputation intact, or he could refuse, go bankrupt, and explain to his friends why his wife owns his business. I told him he had 5 minutes to decide. But there were conditions. I told him I wasn't done. I pointed at Delilah. I said she leaves. Now. Delilah gasped. She looked at Gavin, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to tell me I was being unreasonable. Gavin didn't look at her. He was doing mental math, calculating his survival. I said I wanted her out of the house in 1 hour. I said if she was still here at 9 o'clock, the price of the land went up to $11 million. I added the second condition. I wanted a post-nuptial agreement signed today. I wanted full ownership of the house. I wanted him to assume all the debt, and I wanted a clause that stated if he ever tried to restrict my access to funds again, I would get everything. Gavin looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. He whispered that he would call the movers. Delilah let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. She screamed that he was a coward. She screamed that I had brainwashed him. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured myself a fresh cup. I took a sip. I watched the steam rise. I told her she was wasting time. I told her she had 55 minutes left. The next hour was a blur of chaotic justice. Delilah ran around the house, throwing clothes into garbage bags, sobbing and cursing. Gavin sat at the kitchen table, on the phone with his lawyer, shouting to get the post-nup drafted immediately. I stood by the window, watching the driveway. At 8:55, a taxi pulled up. Delilah dragged 2 suitcases out the front door. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at me. Her eyes were full of venom. She said I would never be happy. She said I was a cold, heartless bitch. I smiled. I told her that was the nicest thing she had ever said to me. I watched the taxi pull away. Gavin walked up behind me. He was holding a stack of papers that his lawyer had just emailed and he had printed on the home printer. His hand was shaking as he held the pen. He asked if we were good. He asked if he could have the deed now. I took the papers. I read them. They were perfect. Total surrender. I signed them. Then I pulled the transfer of ownership forms for the land out of my purse. I had brought them with me, prepared. I signed them and handed them to him. He took them like they were holy scripture. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He started to cry, not tears of remorse, but tears of relief. I looked down at him. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I realized then that I didn't want to be his partner. I didn't even want to be his boss. I walked to the counter and picked up the $20 bill he had given me on Saturday. I flicked it at him. It fluttered down and landed on his chest. I told him to keep the change. Update: 3 months later. The divorce was finalized last week. It turns out that once you strip a narcissist of his financial power, he becomes incredibly boring. Gavin managed to close the deal with the data center, but between paying me my $10 million, paying off his bridge loan, and settling the tax bill, he walked away with almost nothing. He kept the company, but it's a shell. His reputation took a hit when rumors circulated that his wife had to bail him out of a bad deal. Delilah is living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. I hear she's been banned from her bridge club for complaining too much. As for me, I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. The walls held too many bad memories. I bought a penthouse in the city, one with a view of the river and the new data center rising from the mud. I hired Beatrice as my operations manager. We started a venture capital firm that specializes in funding women-owned businesses. We called it the tampon fund, just to be petty. Yesterday, I was at the grocery store. I was standing in the feminine hygiene aisle looking at the prices. A woman next to me was counting coins in her hand, looking stressed. I remembered that feeling, the suffocation, the fear. I pulled out my black card, the one with my name on it, the one with no limit. I paid for her groceries. I paid for everyone's groceries in the line, because hunger doesn't make women behave, it makes them hunt. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.